Good morning, guys, and welcome back to the shop. It's raining today, so I'm stuck inside the shop. And today I want to talk about wedges, both wooden wedges and metal wedges, which I prefer, which ones I think work best for which problems, and a little bit of theory and perhaps an improvement, a prototype, if you will, of a new modern wedge. Let's dig into it. So let's quickly talk about how I store my wedges. This is a Stanley FatMax case. DeWalt's T-Stack system is the same exact thing, same company, guys. And I would suggest you get the deepest packs that you can get for wedges. You can see here in the back, I got a variety of wooden wedges. And then up front here, I have the two basic kinds of metal wedges. Let's just go ahead and jump right into the softwood versus hardwood debate, and I'll tell you what I think about it and why. So one of my main maxims, as some of you may know, is no always, no never. I don't think it's a case of never use softwood and only use hardwood, or vice versa. I think there is a time and a place for either or. Let's talk about the dominant driving theories behind the softwood boys and the hardwood boys. So simplified, the argument seems to be about compression. So the softwood boys insist that you can get more wedge down in the kerf, henceforth getting more compression and spread on the eye. Whereas the hardwood boys insist that the hardwood, this being oak, will take more compression. Meaning a couple of things, but mostly that when you're using the axe, there's a lot of force put on that eye. And the argument seems to be, as I understand it, that the harder wood, especially when paired with something like hickory or ash, an already hard wood, will maintain that compression, whereas the softer wood, this being white pine, will over time soften and deform and become a misshapen, mushy thing, and consequently your head will loosen up. So here's what I think. In theory, softwood is king, for the obvious reason that you're going to be able to get more of this wedge down inside a tight kerf. And maybe you've not thought of this, but because it's softer, the pores are further apart, meaning this will absorb more oil after it's in the kerf, consequently expanding. So you can see how it just runs right off the oak there and wants to soak into the pine more. However, this is the one reason why I don't use softwood very often. They're easy to break when you're trying to hammer it in, whereas a hardwood wedge will really allow you to give it some and get it down in that wedge. Now, it will often, I shouldn't say often, but it will occasionally pop out on you, which is why you're going to either want to glue it or put a wedge on top of it. But even if this breaks while you're knocking it down in, so long as you can knock the pieces down in there, you're going to be okay. But if it breaks this way on you, you're in trouble. Now, this is white pine, extremely soft. Not all softwoods are this soft. So let's take a look at some of the options that we have when it comes to hard versus softwood. So the way that I've arranged this case is by hard, medium hard, and soft, with a spillover of softwood here and a spillover of hardwood here. And then in these three containers, we have more exotic woods that are for aesthetically pleasing axes. But the cool thing about this container is that each individual container comes out and you can shift these around and also take them out, spill them, so we can take a closer look. So let's go ahead and do that specifically with the medium soft and talk about how those might be the most ideal. So to be honest, I have no idea what the Janka scale says about the hardness of these woods, and I don't really care, to be honest, but in performance, I would consider these three up front, hackberry, mulberry, and osage, to perform closer to softwoods like pine and poplar, and these three in the back, beech, elm, and sycamore, to perform closer to a hardwood like oak or like ash. So in my experience, these are good middle of the road woods to use as wedges. kind of a good compromise between what you get out of a softwood as opposed to what you get out of a hardwood. So there are certainly more varieties of exotic woods that you can use for pretty wedges out there, but these are some of my favorites. Over here we have the purple heartwood, which is a really hard exotic wood that you can use, and it looks gorgeous when oiled. Really dark, and those purple hues come out. Over on this side here we have some darker, harder woods as well. This is black walnut, which I used in the splitting axe a long time ago, and you can see how dark it gets when you put oil on it. And mahogany is another one that darkens up. I just used this on my Connie that I hung, which I won't show you guys just now. That's going to come in a video real soon, I promise you. And then in the middle here, probably the prettiest examples of exotic woods I have, we got box elder, which is just gorgeous. I mean, take a look at those colors. And again, they just get more vibrant when you oil them. And then up front here, an example of a laminated wedge, which is when you take several species of wood, glue them together, and then you get a pretty striped wedge like this. And if you saw my wedge banger video, you saw that I used a laminated wedge there. Again, not necessary in a beater axe like this, but cool nonetheless. To glue or not to glue? That is the question, isn't it? So I don't know, guys. I do glue sometimes, but most of the time I don't. I'm going to be putting a barrel wedge on top most of the time, so I know that wedge isn't going to back out. But when I have glued, or when I do glue, it's because I want to bond two pieces of wood together and effectively create one piece of wood that will expand and contrast together. I do know, however, that when you use glue, trying to tighten up an axe later or remove the handle from the head is a bitch. So just for that reason, I say no glue. So let's move the conversation along to where my interests really lie. Metal wedges. All right, so as I see it, there are three categories of wedges. There's your traditional step wedge, and there's variation among those. Then there's your safety wedges, including a shear pin of some kind. This is just a nail sawn off for demonstration, but these are just to keep the axe head from flying off. I consider these type of wedges a metal wedge just to keep the wooden wedge from backing out. And then we have my favorite, which is the modern barrel wedge, including the wooden dowel in that category as well. Let's talk about what these wedges can do for you and what they won't. All right, so what's the purpose of these metal wedges? So I've already said that these safety wedges, as I call them, or Swedish wedges, these are the wedges that Granfors Brooks use or used to use on their axes. They no longer use them on their small axes anymore because they feel they don't need them. And they didn't need one. They needed two. But these do not offer any spread, really, of wood in this direction or in this direction. They're just there to keep your wooden wedge from backing out. So with those aside, we got these triangles next. And I basically consider these a step up from the safety wedge. So this will push wood slightly in either direction, depending on which way you drive it, but not a whole lot. So I'm not going to be using this if I want to tighten my axe up, say. I'm just going to be using this if I need to push the axe, say, a little bit in one direction. So it should be said, however, that while these don't do very much in terms of spreading the wood, they are very easy to get back out, especially these little Swedish jobs here. And if you don't want to glue your wedge, just pop one of these suckers on top, and then later when your axe head comes loose, you can easily pluck this out and then seat the axe down some more and then put this guy back in. Can't do that if it's glued. So now on to the most common type of step wedge or stepped wedge, so called because it has these grooves or steps in it to keep it from backing out of the wood. These are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. You can find them on the internet, practically anywhere that they sell axe handles. And they will actually spread wood in either direction, depending on which way you place them, and tighten up your axe. And that's their main purpose as far as I'm concerned. Either for axe head that has a small eye and will not take my favorite barrel wedges, or to tighten up old axes. So it does matter which way you place these. You can see on this cruiser, I had this head come slightly loose on me this winter, which is the most common time for axe heads to come loose, which does, I think, bring up the question of should we try to hang axes during the winter, knowing that they'll only get larger and not smaller after that. But that aside, you can see that I stuck this step wedge in two different directions. And that's because on this side, I wanted to push wood in this direction because I noticed a slight gap in there as the wood shrunk. But over here, I wanted to spread the wedge over top of the eye, and you can see it even knocked down the wooden wedge some, which isn't uncommon. Oftentimes you think your wooden wedge is bottomed out, and it really isn't. So, long story short, this is what I think these guys are good for, tightening up old axes. All right, now with the stepped wedges out of the way, let's talk about these two oddballs really quick. First, I hate these. I don't know why you would use this in substitution for a wooden wedge, but don't throw them away when you get them because you can cut them down and make smaller stepped wedges. So that's what I consider these good for. The wooden dowel. I can't say much about this other than I did use this for the first time recently. I went ahead and put one in this old splitting axe. And yeah, I don't know. I'll let you guys know, but I'm not that impressed with this. It wasn't the easiest thing to do, and I didn't find that it really spread the wood over top of the eye like my favorites. First up is the double cross wedge. This is the traditional style. They came in 4 different sizes, this being the biggest, on down to number 1, which was for hammers. But somebody has modernized this. They essentially beefed it up. They made the cross wedge bigger, and this will spread wood in both directions. The downfall to this, as is the case for my favorite barrel wedges, is that if you already have a tight fit, these guys are hard to drive in, and they're guaranteed to bust up the eye of your axe. And if you don't like that look, you're not gonna like these guys. However, they will absolutely tighten up a loose axe. All right, the barrel wedge. These are my favorite. And the best makers of these, as far as I'm concerned, are either Oxenkoff or Haltefors. It might even be the same manufacturer, to be honest, but they're just the nicest machined barrel wedges, and they're doubled. You can see it's not 1, but 2 barrel wedges. Why do I like these? Well, for the same reason I like these, because they spread wood in all directions at once, tightening up your axe. I even use these on top of a new hung axe just to make sure that I'm getting that spread over top of the eye so that the handle can't come loose. They're my favorites, take it or leave it. I can't really see a good theoretical argument for not liking these other than it busts up the eye wood.
There's another reason I don't mind that cracking on top, because when you're trying to get BLL to soak in there, it'll just wick right down those cracks.
And you could make an argument that that's not only not aesthetically pleasing, but that it somehow compromises the wood. I haven't had any trouble at all.
And let's be honest, they're a bitch to get out.
These are my go-to, and as far as I'm concerned, the barrel wedge is king. Checkmate. So what do I want in a good wedge? Well, let me answer that question by telling you what I don't want. You guys have all seen it. You bought an old axe and it's got all manner of things jammed in there to try to tighten up the head. It's not just screws and nails. I posted over on Axe Junkies to see what guys have pulled out of axes, and I got all kinds of ridiculous things. Flattened out spoons, silver dollars, broken off saw teeth, all kinds of crazy stuff. And it doesn't work. My granddad loved to bend over double-headed nails so that the head couldn't come off, and it was always loose. Now, on one hand, I applaud them for their creativity. My great-grandparents grew up during the Depression on the farm, and they didn't have access to new wedges the way that we do, so they had to use what they had to use, but we don't have to. So use a proper wedge. That said, what I also don't want to see is handles coming with wedges saran wrapped around like this, because it always warps the wedge. And while that's not a deal breaker, it really ain't no good at all.
So I find it interesting that nobody questions grain orientation on wedges when they do on handles so much. But you could definitely break your wedge when hanging an axe and mess up the whole project. So I don't really have an answer, but I'm asking, does grain orientation on wedges matter, running this way or that way? Will it shear one way easier? I'm asking. Let me know in the doobly-doo below. This is my idea. What I would like to see is something like a barrel wedge that you could drive in, but the barrel wedge inside would have little metal arms of some sort, or maybe even some kind of inflatable thing. I'm not an engineer, as you can tell, with a screw or something on top that would allow you to tighten it over time and would expand this. So obviously this is going to be slitted or somehow so that it can expand over time when you tighten this, because all wood shrinks during the winter especially. And it would be a lot easier if we could just tighten this up to press the wood out a little bit more. I don't think that that's an impossible invention. I'm sure it would be expensive to get off the ground, but if there's any Nikola Teslas out there, make me one of these bad boys. Something like that is how I would imagine it, but use your imagination.
Well, guys, that's about all I have to say on the subject. Take it for what it's worth. I'm a guy that enjoys doing this. I've experimented some. I intend to experiment more. Let me know down in the doobly-doo below what you like and what you don't like. And just so you know, I was on my best behavior during this video. It was very difficult talking about hardwoods and softwoods and expanding woods and shrinking woods and not letting that little 8th grader come out. So I was on my best behavior. Until now, anyway. See you guys on the next one.
Use your imagination.